Hello, everybody. My name's Rick McCutcheon. I'm a Dynamics 365 MVP, and I'm here on this MS Dynamics World Thought Leadership panel on planning insights for manufacturers moving to Microsoft Dynamics 365, sponsored by Sikich. So we're going to start out this all-star cast by introducing each one of our panelists. So why don't we start with you, Janet? Tell the people who you are and what you do.
Thanks so much, Rick. My name is Janet Carr, and I'm an almost 20-year veteran of Microsoft. I'm a partner development manager in the US, and I have the pleasure of managing Sikich.
Okay, thank you. Cindy.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Rick. Hi, I'm Cindy Heiberger. I'm the Senior Vice President of Finance and Operations for Mid-Continent Instruments and Avionics. We manufacture and design aircraft instrumentation and power solutions for the aviation industry. And I've been here 26 years, been heavily involved in IT this whole time, from the green screen days all the way up to D365 today. And I definitely vote for the D365 days.
I'm with you on that, Cindy. Okay, Debbie.
Hi, everybody. My name's Debbie Altham. I'm a Senior Director at Sikich in our enterprise practice. I spend most of my days helping organizations sort of envision a future with Dynamics 365 in it.
Thank you, Debbie. Robert.
Hello, everyone. Robert Sawyer. I'm a partner at Sikich on the enterprise practice as well. Work very closely with Debbie. Primary role is operations and delivery, and of course, client satisfaction. So fortunate enough, had some prior history from multiple ERP implementations with Cindy, so pleasure to be a part of the panel.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to kick off our first question, and we're going to start with you, Debbie, so get ready. So over the past couple of years, organizations, including manufacturers, went through some tough times with this pandemic. What did we learn about companies that move their Dynamics deployments to the cloud, or ERP in general to the cloud, compared to those who still had on-premise?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of the organizations we work with are manufacturers, and there's no moving shop floors to the cloud. Pretty much people on the shop floor have to go in every day to make the things that they make. But what has made a big difference is those people who are in support of the shop floor, the people who are on the ground, the people in the warehouse, they've had the opportunity to work from home. And I certainly think with those organizations who have had on-prem systems, there's been a bit of a scramble to work out how they can get their people to work from home. So that accessibility has made a big difference. I'm going to say that something's changed, because halfway through the pandemic, we started getting our phone ringing off the hook virtually, with organizations saying, we need to move now. So there's certainly been a big difference for organizations who have been on-prem, thinking about that sort of distributed computing, the ability for people to log in from anywhere. And I think they've seen that pretty heavily. The other thing, I think, with organizations who are already in the cloud, they've taken the opportunity to do more automation. So, for example, scanning of invoices. That's an activity and a project a lot of organizations took on as part of being in the cloud, so they didn't need to worry about where the paperwork's at. So that's one of the big differences we've seen.
Okay, thank you. Robert, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, we actually had very unique experience during the pandemic where some of the clients we were working with actually were experiencing explosive growth because of the markets they were serving. Because they already had a little bit of an idea and strategy of how they wanted to go down the digital footprint, this just accelerated their entire transformation. It allowed them to be quicker first movers, if you will, during a time where a lot of other manufacturing companies were having a difficult time to respond to their customers. There was already a challenge when it came to proper efficiencies with labor. So having not only just remote access, but working with us to partner and make sure that they understood that the whole digital rollout from ERP to CRM to a host of other things, including Teams, allowed them to accelerate their transformation, go through divestitures and acquisitions, be able to respond quicker to customer demands, grow market share. And, you know, it's just been a tremendous opportunity for us to be part of that.
Okay, thank you, Robert. So Janet, from a Microsoft perspective, a lot's gone on over the last couple of years with digital transformation. What have you seen with ERP?
What I've seen with ERP in regards to the pandemic specifically is that those who were in the cloud were better able to respond to the business process changes that were required in order to do business. So for example, if you're a manufacturer and you're also doing your own distribution and retail, being able to offer curbside service to customers, or being able to offer different types of options in shipping and in receiving and other areas like that. So I think it's important that, being in the cloud gave customers more agility, but it also gave them a lot more security. When you've got the massive number of people that are moving out of the office and working from home on their own networks, security becomes a major issue. And those that were in the cloud are definitely more secure than customers that were on-prem and had to scramble from the security aspect. And then, of course, the access to data is just so much easier in the cloud than it is on-prem. So I think those 3 points really helped customers that were in the cloud respond better to the pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Janet. So over to you, Cindy. Why don't you talk a little bit about your organization and sort of, some of the challenges that you had over the last few years?
Sure. And so a little bit of what Debbie's talking about too, since we're a manufacturer, again, you're on site, and especially being in aviation, we're critical infrastructure. So we were working 100% through everything on the pandemic with a few people off-site limited at that time. So just kind of working through that, we were all 100% on-prem for our AX 2012 ERP system that we were using at that point, and just working through those challenges on what kind of a system can we have in place for our employees on site as well as working remote. And then we also started getting a little bit more picked up demand, particularly within the last year. And so figuring out what we needed to do on that. So that's when we decided we did need to upgrade to a cloud solution and moving over to D365 and doing our implementation as quickly as possible so that we could get moved over and take care of that. And we kept our scope limited to the functionality of what we had and working with our team to get that done. And that was important for us to have that flexibility. And we have that now, which is great.
Okay, thank you. So our next question, we're going to start with you, Robert. Why, we've been talking about cloud computing for some time, and I think it's been available for pretty much the last decade for Dynamics 365. So why are manufacturing companies still challenged with moving their business applications to the cloud?
I think several-fold. I mean, one is culturally more traditional in processes. I would say the general theme is if it's not broke, don't fix it. We don't necessarily need, and I'm going to use some of their terms we hear from newfangled contraptions that are going to just basically cause us to do the same thing. And as long as the world remains constant, as what we all realize how quickly things can change, that works. But once supply chains become extended or overreached, I would say, when MRP becomes much more of a demand focus because there's no longer finagling that's required. They need data, as Janet mentioned, faster. They need to be able to make insightful types of decisions. It's been an accelerant, if you will, and a lot of I'm going to just use the term green screen types of machines. One of the other, I'll say, accelerants during the pandemic itself that helped to enable, I would say, some of the reasons why are the catalyst events for ERP implementations to upgrade to D365 in the cloud was some of the folks that were the original administrators of those systems said, you know what, I think this is going to be my retirement year. I don't think I want to play ball anymore. I think I have enough. We're going to go ahead and I'm just going to move on. And so when everything again was stable and reliable, it all worked. A little bit of tweaks here and there, somebody leaving, like I mentioned about the supply chain, there has to be a reaction to that. And fortunately enough, because in working also with Debbie, we created a very good, I would say, shepherding strategy to how do we take them from fear and panic to here's a game plan. How do we align to that? How do we coach them through each one of the steps? And at the end of the day, not only deliver success, but say, it's going to be okay. We can get through this.
Okay, thanks, Robert. Janet, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I totally agree with Robert that a lot of it has to do with, if the CIO has been there for 20 or 30 years, there is some resistance to looking at something new and sticking with what they have. And so it's not unusual for us to hear, we're probably not going to change until the CIO retires. And that's one area. But the other area is just, it's a big undertaking. And a lot of companies, I think it boils down to two things: fear of change and money. And so they just kind of keep going, doing what they're doing because they don't realize how much better their business could be in the cloud, leveraging some of the new technology, specifically the level of integration of data that you can get in the cloud that you cannot get on-prem without an awful lot of cost. So I think that if they could do more envisioning, there might be less resistance. But again, that the CIOs that are resistant to change are the gatekeepers unless you can get to the business people.
And just to add to your point about, data in on-prem systems, by the time you actually get the data out into a usable format, it's a lot of times obsolete, right? Where cloud data, it's real time. Okay, Debbie, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I'm going to just extend what Janet said. I think a lot of people know that this is a direction that everyone's going. If they want to buy a modern ERP, there isn't any option if it's not on the cloud. There really is no other option. So I think there's a struggle on how do we get started? Where do we jump off the cliff, if you will? And the idea of envisioning what that future looks like. At Sikich, we've been using a framework called Catalyst. It's been developed by Microsoft that helps us work with organizations to create that picture, to show them what it's going to look like and help them understand how to get there in a way that prioritizes the things that make the biggest business benefits. So I think yes, it has to happen, but a lot of organizations need to see the justification for the money, for the spend. So that process helps us line up the steps to take, understand the investment required to take those steps so that you've got a bit of a clearer path forward. And I think that makes a big difference when people actually get a vision of what it's going to look like once they get there.
Okay, Debbie, thank you. So Cindy, from your perspective, why do companies sort of slowly move towards the cloud instead of running there?
Right, and I think a big part of it that everyone's already addressed is the fear of change, right? I think for us, it was also a concern about losing control. And so that was one of the things we really had to work through quite a bit on, if we needed extra, horsepower or extra servers or anything performance-wise, we could take care of that ourselves. And so having to rely on somebody else was a different undertaking for us. We're rather independent. And then also performance was a big issue for us. So we did an assessment through a partner through Sikich to kind of assess what that would take to move from on-prem to the cloud. We educated our team quite a bit on what that would take, put in to some of those recommendations from security assessment, but we also beefed up our internet pipe at those locations so we could address that performance issue for our users. And so just understanding all of that, and I think long-term now, the ROI on that will come through because now it's all being taken care of, through the Microsoft cloud base. We don't have to worry about servers, maintenance, backups, any of those types of things. It actually kind of simplifies things for our IT department.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. So let's talk a little bit about, some of the options. So what options are available today for those looking at Microsoft Dynamics 365 ERP solutions? And what are the differences in those options? And how does an organization determine which option best fits their company, including, I guess, size of the product, licensing, user adoption? So let's start with Janet.
Put me on the spot first. So this is going to be slightly blasphemous for me to say coming from Microsoft, but software is only half of the solution. The partner that you select is critical, and the partner needs to have an understanding of your industry, your vertical, your business process, and they should help guide you as to which of our products is the best fit for you, not just today, but you're not looking at probably changing your ERP system out in 3 years. So if you could get by using Business Central today, but in 3 years you're going to outgrow it, you're probably better off investing in D365 today and turning on additional features and functions as you need them. So I can't impress upon anyone listening today as to how important having the right partner engaged with you from the get-go, doing the assessment, looking at the options, guiding you along, is to the success of your implementation.
Okay, thank you, Janet. Debbie, you're one of the right partners. Tell us, what do you tell customers?
Actually, and this is an interesting conversation because I've had it already twice this week with organizations who are on either an on-prem GP or they're on NAV, for example, or even on AX, to be honest, where because Sikich does both Business Central, Dynamics 365 Business Central, and Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain, we're probably better equipped than most because we have a view of both options. And what we often do is we'll take an hour, we'll talk to them about what's important for their business, and pretty quickly we've come to a decision that this is generally the way forward. And the way forward may not be what you expect. That's what I would say. There are organizations on AX who really Business Central looks like it's a really good fit and will be perfectly adequate, be able to do all of the things they need it to do. Similarly, people on GP have found that although Business Central may be looking to be the next best step, they end up looking at finance and supply chain because really, based on their growth trajectory, based on all of the add-ons, the ISVs they've had in the past, they really do think they're going to get a lot of value out of going straight to Dynamics 365 Finance and Supply Chain. So it may not necessarily be one or the other at first glance, but certainly I think with someone who can come to the table with the view of how both of those systems operate in the industry that they're in, we can pretty quickly help organizations come to a decision. And if not, we again go down the sort of envisioning path, looking at something like a catalyst engagement, where we come in, we help paint that vision of the future, and then we map the solution basically to the way the organization wants to move forward.
And I think you hit on something there, talking about the ISV solutions that match. And I think Janet hit on it too, saying find a partner that understands your business and your industry, because right. There's a lot, we get into an F&O or we get into a Business Central implementation, there's going to be several ISVs that we're going to have to connect to it. And if the partners aren't familiar with these products, they could take that customer in the wrong direction. So Robert, any advice from you?
Yeah, I would kind of frame it to expound a little bit of what has already been said. I would say it's people, it's process, it's partner, and product. So there's almost, and I had firsthand experience working with Cindy, so I don't want to steal any thunder, Cindy, but she did a great job driving a catalyst for change with her own team, actually did some internal change management. We assisted somewhat. They had leadership assignments. They talked about the people first, then it was the process, right? Some processes had to change. It wasn't going to be a lift and shift from GP, but the box is very large. I mean, people talk about out of the box. The box is very large. There's a tremendous amount of options, but you have to have a solve for mentality, not of this won't work because it doesn't look exactly like what I do today. Well, let's envision that. The partner, I think, has already been mentioned, but I think the other part about the partner is anticipating the blind spots, because if you've never been down this path, if you don't know the right ISV portfolio solution for a solution set, because a client doesn't want to hear 50 options, you choose one. They want to be advised and they want to hear the reasons why. And we have to be okay with those recommendations because of our history, not just relationships, but history and understanding of what the impact of each one of these decisions are. And then it kind of, I would say, almost like pachinko, conforms to the right size product, whether or not that's BC, whether or not that's F&O. We're adept at recommending what the right solution is, because at the end of the day, we want to have the best client success story that we can, and that's our goal.
Hey, thank you, Robert. So Cindy, you went through this decision-making process. Maybe you can sort of enlighten us a little more about what exactly you did.
Right, and it is an extensive decision and a process to go through. And to reinforce what everyone else is talking about, having the right partner does make a difference. The right partner, the software piece of it, the partner, someone who knows your business, can work with you. Because some of the questions we don't know to ask, so we need somebody to help guide us through that. So we don't miss some things. And I think that's important. It is complex. And there's so many different pieces with all the different ISV options. Again, working with the people, making sure that you're thinking through all that and vetting it. We also include, as Robert says, our people all the way through. So including members of the leadership team, we have some options of different ERP systems. What do you guys think? Having people involved in that, having some input and some say in that is important to find out what their needs and requirements are up front, and then making sure we're finding a solution that fits for them and vetting that piece of it. But definitely having the processes in place with all the people, not just the heavy users, and that user adoption is so key, and making sure that that is all prepared and ready before you go live on anything.
So Cindy, maybe we can talk a little bit about this user adoption, or now we're starting to call it digital adoption, because you went from this on-premise system to this new cloud system.
Right.
What did you do with your people to get them ready and then to train them?
Right, and I think the earlier on that you involve people, the better. All of it up front. They're going to see the system, they're going to see the new screens, and they're going to look for those differences, no matter what. So go ahead and get that piece of it out of the way and get people used to it. And an adjustment for us is it doesn't have to be perfect before we start showing things to people. We would prefer for it to be, but it's okay, and get people used to it, and then they can start thinking about their processes on how it fits into the system a little bit better and feel more comfortable with the system. And then train. Robert has talked to us about that all the time, about making sure we train people, test, and involve people as much as possible. And then we iron things out prior, so up front.
Okay, thank you very much. So our next question, we're going to kind of get into you as the coach. So you're going to come into an organization who is faced with this task. I've got this on-premise, let's say, Great Plains system that's at least 10 years old, and now I've got to move it to the cloud. What do we do? How do we help this person out? Why don't we start with you, Debbie?
So the very first thing is to understand that ERP implementations are ERP implementations. They're not something you would do for fits and giggles. And so taking it really seriously as a implementation. Now, although there are migration tools available for migrating from GP to Business Central, for example, a lot of organizations take the opportunity to have a look at how those processes have been set up. And many people say, if I had my time again, I'd do it differently. So this is the opportunity to do it differently. So what we find is that we are implementing a new system. So I would say that look at it as an opportunity to learn from what you've experienced previously, and learn from the way that these new cloud systems are deployed. We have a lot more automation, for example. We have a lot more features, for example. And look at the opportunity for the organization to fit into those features and make the most of the spend, because what you're looking for is a return on investment. And the last thing you want to do is spend all this money to go to the cloud and have something that is no better than it used to be, but in the cloud. I think that's a really important piece of advice.
Okay, thank you. Coach Robert, how are you going to help these people out?
So it's very interesting. The narrative, I think we always have to be aware of what the narrative is, that this is not an IT project. This is a business initiative, having the right executive support. What wasn't mentioned is the framework. It sounds almost cliche these days because everybody can say, well, yeah, that's obvious, but to execute on the obvious is a different task. having steering committee meetings, having status meetings, having status reports, reviewing tasks in Azure DevOps. But again, you take all these, what could be disparate items, and if they don't, I would say aggregate into the right narrative, that you have to be collaborating, as what Cindy's already mentioning, what's the direction, what's the pulse of the project, how is everybody feeling, because feelings do matter and they do color the room whenever people have different interpretations. It's just very important to constantly have your finger and pulse on the project, leverage all the right tools, and make sure the right people are engaged from all different levels, because the partner can't be the only ones driving the project and I would say selling the product. It has to be assistant coaches have to be involved as well.
Okay. All right. An assistant coach like somebody from Microsoft. So Coach Janet, what are you going to help the people with?
Well, it's interesting because coming from Microsoft, I get to see escalations, which are not always fun, but they are educational. And really, it's about setting expectations and making sure everybody is on the same page. I am shocked at how many customers sign statements of work and they don't really understand what they're getting. So I think setting expectations. I mean, and the other thing is that it isn't like a partner can come in and do it all without any participation from your people. You're going to need a team of people that are going to have to spend time to this project in order for you to get what you want. It's critical that the power users are doing some of the testing. It's also critical that you try to minimize customizations. You're going to a new system for a reason, not to recreate the old system on the cloud. So as Debbie said, there's time to make the improvements and change the way you're doing things. And people get very intransigent. I see, they thought a feature worked a certain way. They think it's a bug. It's not a bug. It's the way it was designed. Really try to be open-minded about whether or not you can adjust or have the flexibility to look at how you do things in a different manner.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, panel. We've had a great session here on migrating manufacturers to the cloud. So I'm going to give you your chance to give us some of your closing thoughts. Over to you first, Robert.
I think a lot of things have already been mentioned. Flexibility, the mindset, what I would suggest is have a solve for mentality. A lot of people can identify problems, and that's part of, if you will, the path. But having a solve for, okay, we've identified the problem, here's what I think we should have as a recommended solution, and really try to collaborate with your partner, because we certainly won't know it all, even though we may be experts within an industry. We need every bit of insight to make sure that we're making the most efficient decision. And as what's already been referenced throughout the call is engagement, collaboration, leadership, involvement, all of that. It seems rather minor at times, but it's extremely valuable to the success of a project.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Janet, your closing thoughts.
Well, I wouldn't be from Microsoft if I didn't mention really one of the key advantages of any of the BizOps Dynamics solutions, and that is the underlying platform. Because having access to real-time data to drive immediate decisions is so key and so important to being competitive in today's landscape, it's absolutely critical that you look at an ERP solution that's going to have an underlying platform where the integrations where most of your time and cost come from are more and more out of the box, integrated, BizOps into Teams, BizOps into data and analytics especially. So I think that that's really kind of something key, and when a customer is starting to consider who they're going to look at, that they need to look at a broader perspective than just ERP and actually look at the entire platform.
Okay, thank you, Janet. And Cindy, your closing thoughts.
I think an ERP system has to support the business operations, and so starting with that is very, very important. Everything but the people on what do they need to perform their job functions is important, and involving them. So we've used that word quite a bit, but the involvement is key. And getting as many people included in those decisions and those processes as much as possible helps them do their jobs better, and they will appreciate that. but always looking for those gains. What are they gaining from that? What are we gaining from a new system, a new upgrade, moving over to the cloud? And then remembering to enforce that, not just with the primary team, but with every single person on the system, so they remember why we are doing that. I think it's important.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. And our last question for the day will go to Debbie. Debbie, now that we talked about getting ERP migration right, tell us how Sikich and Head Start and your Head Start program can help manufacturers reach their business objectives.
Sure. So Sikich have a implementation methodology with extra bells on. So it's not just an implementation methodology, it's how we mentally go about approaching an upgrade or a migration to D365. So what it is a preset amount of business processes. I think our solution architect team have developed over 5,000 business processes that are complete in the library, where people, when we go to them and we say, what do you want to do as part of this upgrade? The number one thing is, let's get rid of all those modifications. Oh goodness, we tried to build our old system into the last version. Let's get rid of all of the ISV solutions and let's work out of the box. So part of what we've done is pre-build a lot of those up and say, this is sort of represents best practice. What I would say is, when we say best practice, we mean your business operations are working in concert to or very closely to the way the system was designed to work. Doesn't mean that it's particularly fantastic. It means it basically works the way it was designed. So with Head Start, we've bought in that. We've also bought in a more agile approach to implementing. So what we do is we try and get that system configured very, very quickly using our preset up business workflows. And then the idea is to get this in the hands of the people very quickly. Now, it's not going to be 100%, it's not going to be perfect, but the idea that we get the system in front of people who are using it really quickly, so then they can have an opportunity to get familiar with what they're looking at and to learn from very, very early days. You know, gone are the days where we sit there for months on end writing out how you do things today and then come back to you, go away, configure in the background, come back and say da-da like 3 months later. Instead, we get that out and in front of everyone really, really quickly. And we found that is a really effective way. The quicker you have the new system in the hands of the people who are going to use it, the quicker they can start thinking about how that system is going to work for them, the more effective it is from a change management perspective. So with Head Start, we have pre-configurations, we have industry sort of platforms where we've chosen ISVs that we believe are essential in terms of delivering the full experience with Dynamics 365 for a particular industry. It also includes the way that we use Azure DevOps. So we have a great way within Azure DevOps of being able to manage the process of implementation. We've also got, with those pre-configured workflows, we bring a mechanism by which organizations can keep up with the continuous update cycle. So automated regression testing, for example, is sort of built into some of these features. But I think what we've done is, this is a new world order for ERP, right? It's in the cloud. They're pushing updates there's like 8 updates a year, 2 major releases. We've had to think about how we implement and change the way that we implement to be more agile, to be able to bring things to organizations in terms of features and functions more quickly. We need to take some of the risk out of the process. So as the software world has changed, so is the way that we're dealing with that software. So we think Head Start is there's been, I'm going to say thousands, Robert, thousands of hours invested in Head Start, right?
At a minimum.
Yeah. And you know what, from our perspective, the other valuable thing is that what that means is that all of our implementation teams, and you know, we've got over 100 people out there implementing the software, is that they can use that as a centralized repository to manage the collection of their knowledge. So it doesn't mean that the project team working with Cindy doesn't have great ideas that come from that project. and keep it to themselves and move on, they push it back into Head Start. So that becomes a collective asset that we can draw on for other teams who are actually implementing the system as well. So for us, it gives the ability to try and scale with some confidence.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Debbie.
You're
And
welcome.
thank you, panel. This was a great conversation on manufacturing and dynamics in the cloud. So hopefully we'll get back to you at some point. We can talk more about this, but for now, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.